Hi, this is Paul. It is Friday afternoon, and I made a video with this cool thumbnail that you're not going to see. About 6 of you saw the first 18 minutes of it, and then there's no sound after that. And I realized that my fan sort of puts a little bit of noise onto the microphone, and so I muted the microphone, and I forgot to unmute it for the whole video. Ouch. Hate it when that happens. Anyway, it was in No Wait, No Ads, and a few of you saw the first 18 minutes. I hope to redo it. It's a couple articles that I'd read, but the problem was that I've already sort of moved on mentally to the second video I wanted to do. I wanted to do a couple of things, and so that one's going to replace this. Kidology just put out a video with Andrew Tate and Ken and Nietzsche on the cover. Good thumbnail. And very interesting video that I wanted to do some work on, along with Renn's Substack Newsletter 79, the teachings of neo-pagan masculinity. Kidology's video is all men are lost, and I got to get this sound wrangled. Can't miss the first few seconds because she says Barbie is pro men. Woohoo! And I like Kidology a lot. She has a very compelling channel. I don't watch all of her videos, but when I do watch them, I usually come away pretty impressed by her thoughts, even though I've got some pretty significant differences and some critiques. But let's get into it.
Barbie is pro-men. Yes, I said it. And here's why. Salutations and welcome
Little Charlotte's Web there.
Welcome back to my channel. My name is Kidology and I make videos about everything and any.
Yeah, she does make videos about different things. But there's a ton in this video. Here we go.
On a whim, I was a little bored. Is taking the world by storm, Barbie. And I wasn't going to actually go and watch this film. I just went on a whim. I was a little bored. I was feeling a little bit lost in life as of late. And so I just decided and happened upon a cinema and went and watched it. I'm going to be honest, it did not blow my mind. It was just a film like any other film. I really didn't see anything or find anything terribly exceptional.
And yet we're here making a video about it. And by the end of this video, she sort of changes her tune, telling people to go watch it.
About it. I think that everything to do with Barbie has really got a lot to do with the name, the heritage, the history, the nostalgia, with the significance of the toy itself.
Okay, now one of the points that I wanted to make in my original Barbie movie video, and I want to, now that I'm back in Sacramento, I want to spend a lot more time sort of walking through this video. Now, Kidology doesn't have at least access at this point to sort of the meta-modernity concept. This gets into the whole thing about once you have a name of something, back in the days of spiritual warfare, Frank Peretti books, one of the real keys in the Christian charismatic movement was once you get the name of the demons, you have power over it. And there's a lot of truth to that, and sort of this way that we're talking about spirits. Once you get the name of a spirit, you have a degree of power over it. You have a handle on it. And so to get into the whole to get back to the meta-modernity, Paul Anleitner's been working on this too on his channel, especially on his podcast. Once you get a sense of meta-modernity, one of the things that you need to do what post-modernity does is sort of take the legs out from everything. And meta-modernity, because we need, once again, to try to recapture and have the ability to have ideals and morals and to have them not all undermined by post-modernity, the meta-modern move is to once again look for usually something in mass culture, even though mass culture is sort of fragmented, and this sort of forces things back into modernity. So what you see with these meta-modern movies is that they're looking for something to begin the conversation with, and something like Barbie has enough cultural substance that it can be used broadly enough to at least work from, because postmodernity has sort of swept everything away. And whether it's Barbie itself or a critique of Barbie, it's at least a place to build on and a place to stand on.
With the significance of the doll and, of course, the absolutely phenomenal, exceptional, out of this world marketing and promotion for this film, which has.
Okay, and so Buzz itself is another one of these platforms to begin a conversation with, because there's at least enough substance there that you can talk about it, that across enough of a spectrum, whether you think it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's at least a thing, and you can start with it.
Has been something that I think Hollywood is going to try and emulate again and again and again with films like this.
And I think that's true as well. One of the what happened with postmodernity, I remember an article that Tim Keller talked about, and what I used to do with Tim Keller sermons was I'd always track down where they were from. And one article that was written in the 90s talked about the fact that in postmodernity, again, one of these at least platforms you can build on is popularity and money. And so if, well, marketing the heck out of something, that's going to lead to money, well, we're all going to follow that. And that's obviously been something that people have done for a while.
Additionally, I think everything that Barbie represents as a doll, insofar as beauty standards are concerned, insofar as body positivity is concerned, it resonates with a lot of people in.
So again, the critique is something that enough people can say, oh, Barbie is horrible, even though they wanted them as kids, and that's broad enough in the culture.
The modern world, and with everything to do with, especially the narrative around feminism today, the narrative around women and where we are going. Of course, this film was going to do well. It is perfect.
No. They marketed the heck out of a lot of movies that flop, and so you can't just attribute it to marketing. There's way more going on with this movie. Again, I said it with my video. This is an important movie. Like it or hate it, it's an important movie. And I don't know if it'll be as important as, let's say, The Matrix in 1999 was, but I think this was an important movie.
For the zeitgeist, everything to do with the film sort of just comes together like a spider diagram to the center of Barbie. And so I can most definitely understand why it did so well and why it is doing so well.
I can't for the life of me figure out why Kidology always uses this fuzzy mic on a clip, but that's her shtick.
Even though, as a film in and of itself, it is nothing terribly special. So that's not me saying that this film...
And again, no, it's special. It's special in the way that these postmodern platforms are special.
Isn't a great film when you consider everything else aside from the plot, aside from the film itself and its story, its narrative.
Yeah, there's plenty you can pick on in the film in terms of the plot,
the script, etc. What I found most interesting was my experience in the cinema. It was very, very strange because...
Okay, and this is also very meta-modern in that the sensibility, again, is the key word, and the experience. What's key is the experience that I have in the movie. That's and then also grasping for this communal experience. The communal aspect. So one of the things in the video that there's so much that I said so much that was never recorded. One of the things in that video is the question of the individual and the rise of the individual and how that rise of the individual has left us with loneliness. So often happens, this might be just bringing these two videos together in some sort of way.
This has never happened in a cinema before. When the credits rolled...
No, it has happened in the cinema before.
Somebody started clapping, and then suddenly everybody started clapping. I have never experienced anything like that. I don't know if this is just the culture in the...
No, it happens, and it happens in movies that connect with people. Happens in America.
North of England, where I have just relocated, but I was quite surprised because, as I said, I didn't think it was exactly, an eye-opening film. I mean...
And again, this is where when you sort of notice that it's a thing. And that's the language we used in sort of this, after all of the acids of postmodernity have been around, what remains is a thing. And so then when you have a spontaneous eruption of applause, people look around and say, oh, it's a thing. This is important. There's something here. Now, it's helpful to try to figure out what that something is. But yes, the Barbie movie is a thing. It's an important movie.
You know, I watch Meryl Streep films. I expect a lot.
That's an interesting statement.
So it was very strange, but then it sort of made sense when I started to reason with why this was happening, why this film spoke to so many, especially young people, especially women. The cinema was...
What's interesting is she goes through that it's always woman, not women, but woman as sort of as the category.
Noticeably packed with a lot of young women, a lot of Gen Z, millennial women, more so than men. It seemed as if boyfriends had just been dragged along more so than wanting to go and see the film.
This father wanted to see the film.
But it was fascinating to see this sort of act of female camaraderie, clapping together, people clapping as if they'd sort of achieved something. It was like...
And again, in a culture now that is devoid of communal experiences, in a culture that is not going to church, where you will have communal experiences much more often, where you have a body that you participate in regularly, where you sing together, where you stand and profess together. You know, in some churches you might have a procession together. I mean, all of these embodied communal things that are still in the church world, for individuals now in the world, that's an issue.
Like, yes, we've achieved something. We've achieved something with this film. This is...
And I find that, and she's right, in that people have a sense of, yes, this is a thing, this is a movement, we've achieved something. But I look at it and think, oh my, how low your standards are. You've paid probably way too much money to see this movie, and you had a moment, and that's it. The moment is gone. So I just actually today finished watching Jesus Revolution, which is out on Netflix, and there's a scene in this movie. So Greg Lowry, who eventually becomes sort of this big evangelist who do crusades all around the world. He comes out of this movement, and he was raised by an alcoholic mother, a dysfunctional home, was sort of lured out of military academy by a hot girl. They started playing around with psychedelics, but that all sort of went wrong. He had a scare in the movie when, you know, the one dude who was high was driving this VW bus. I mean, there's a lot of cliches built on top of this to try to make the movie work. And now again, there's a after postmodernity, there's a meta-modern element of that the films have to all trade in these stereotypes, because these stereotypes are all that we have left of communiculture. So then he meets Lonnie Frisbee, and he goes to church, and then he walks, somebody comes into the church, and he walks out of the church, and it's this really important moment. So his girlfriend pleads with him to just give it a chance. And he says, I don't know, it might be real. And he says back to her, she says that to him, and she says back to her, that's the problem, Kathy. Kathy with an E. Look, I just can't be let down again. I can't be left. And then after that, he's going to go to the ocean, and he's going to get baptized, and that's going to start a whole new thing for him. But again, you have this question of, okay, I've tried psychedelics, I've done this, I've done that. I need something that's going to last. You know, I can go to the Barbie movie and I can have this experience, but something has to endure. And of course, this is part of the reason I did this channel, because I knew people were going to be having experiences watching the Jordan Peterson biblical series, but there's going to have to be a community. There's going to have to be relationality. There's going to have to be something here that endures.
brilliant film, this is great. And it was, at the time, very strange. But I think in terms of everything that we are sold as postmodern consumers, it makes a lot of sense.
And I think it's postmodern, yeah, but increasingly meta-modern consumers, because part of the difficulty of consumerism with postmodernity is it's tough to build something on very little.
I mean that is ultimately what we all are today in the modern world. We are individuals
And it's so funny in the modern world where postmodern consumers are. How about in the postmodern world?
who have replaced spirituality or spiritualism and essentialism with materialism, not just in terms of us consuming things, but even within ourselves and our identities. Our identities are increasingly founded on the material world, on aesthetics, on becoming an aesthetic, on changing our aesthetic and changing our identities continually in order to revitalize ourselves, in order to become a better, newer version of ourselves. We place
Now, what's interesting about this, especially watching this after Jesus' Revolution, is that a big part of the counterculture was the pushback against materialism, the pushback against modernity, and again wanted something experiential, existential, and you see that sort of come around again right now.
values in our possessions, in having things, material things.
Because this is exactly the critique that the hippies had against their parents' generation. Now, of course, their parents' generation grew up in the Depression and survived World War II, and so they were just after 10 years of depression and 5 years of war, they were just exhausted. And it's like, all I want is a quiet suburb and material security. And it was very much a post-traumatic frenzy of order and affluence and please let me rest after everything that I've endured in the depression and the war. But of course, their kids didn't experience the depression and the war. All their kids felt was prosperity and the constant urges of the parent. Kathy's father, his love interest, first denies, can I marry your daughter? No. And well, why not? Well, because you don't have the money and the security and you don't have all of those things that you need. But of course, that generation grew up with all of that. They could assume all of the affluence. And so some of them, but again, you've got half of them that could sort of assume the affluence because they lived it. And the other half of them were living the dysfunctional side of it. Maybe mom was a modernist Barbie in the daytime, but she drank herself to sleep at night. And the other side were just working like crazy and hounding their kids to follow along in the productive way so that they too can experience the prosperity and the comfort that now post-war America can afford you.
That seemingly make us who we are. And in that, we become sort of very fragmented in our own internal identity and psychology because we have an identity or all these different identities that are founded on things that are quite baseless. And I think...
And again, so this difficulty of identity that she talks about here is absolutely postmodern because there's no sort of commonality to build upon. And so it's an experiential identity. And it's so fluid and so transitional and so experiential. And so then people have exactly what Greg Lowry is complaining. Okay, I got high, but so what? I can't live high, and even if I wanted to. You have both registers, and it's like the registers need to be in sync, and it needs to be durable and lasting. It needs to be something I can count on, and that's of course what he's looking for from Kathy and a relationship. Is I want something that's enduring. My father, he thought at that point that his father left him. He finds out later that spoiler alert, that his mother left his father, or at least the man that he thought was his father wasn't really his father. And when asked for justification for this, the mother says, because I knew what was going to happen, because nothing lasts. And so there you go. But you have exactly the same thing with identity. Today I'm this, tomorrow I'm that, the next day I'm this other thing. And I mean, far more radically, today I'm a man, tomorrow I'm a woman, next week I'll be a furry and I'll be a cat. you tire of this because it is just so exhausting and so much work.
We can see how terribly that is playing out at the moment with celebrities sort of going through what I like to call a humanization process, the likes of Ariana Grande or Doja Cat, individuals who are not playing into that sort of parasociality of being a postmodern consumable product, which is ultimately what modern celebrities are. But in terms of...
So in other words, the profilicity of the celebrities is built upon a certain image that is consumed and marketed and so on. So you've got a few celebrities that are going to sort of be their authentic selves, but where exactly is that secret sacred self underneath? And this is the problem when I have a video that gets dropped out because so David Brooks in his essay complains about the loss of morality. I really have to redo that video. Complains about the loss of morality because of this turn inward and basically the secret sacred self. It has to be authentic to whatever that secret sacred self is down there, but that secret sacred self is basically the reflection in the bottom of a well that people are looking at, and the water isn't exactly always still.
Barbie, the Barbie film, and all the actors involved and all the people involved have done an exceptional job in playing into the postmodern consumer experience. And
No, it's the modern consumer experience.
Ultimately presenting it as something political.
Part of the difficulty is that you have modern, postmodern, and metamodern, and those are categories that have definition. And what people often want to say or should say is contemporary, which might be modern, postmodern, or metamodern, but it's of the now. And so they'll often say modern or postmodern, depending, but what they want to say is now.
Something revelatory and something for the people and of the people.
Okay, and again, that revelatory or for the people and of the people, that again is this whoosh. It's an experience. It's something that captivates them in the moment, but the moment doesn't stay. And if you go through enough of those moments, and if you begin to realize that, like Greg Lowry, who doesn't have the money that Kathy from A Stable Home doesn't have parents to fall back on, he can't rely on his mother. Everyone's looking for this kaleidoscope, and he's just like, I need something solid. And of course the church and the gospel will become something solid for him.
People, and it's intriguing to see. When everybody in the cinema applauded, it felt as if we were trying to create this community of strangers, of people who had just consumed a film, who had just consumed a bucket of popcorn, who just consumed a slushie and a film ticket. And
that, of course, is not a community. I'm trying to remember, because everything's sort of scrambled by my trip. Peter Lindbergh's doing some Substack work, and he engages with some of this. Less Foolish is not a community, it's a Substack. The Stow is not a community, it's a Zoom account with recorded sessions posted on a YouTube channel. There's a sense of community surrounding them, but there's also a community of practice around ongoing practices associated with them, such as collective journaling. However, I do not use community to describe them. I will only use the word community with those I commune with. If you have a regular Zoom event, poof, a community. If you have a Discord or a Slack, poof, a community. If you enable comments on the Substack, poof, a community. Many people are trying to make online money online tag the word community onto whatever their hustle is. They use the word to evoke a sense of community. Hearing the word feels nice. If it had a smell, it would smell like flowers. If it had a taste, it would taste like homemade butter tarts. If it had a personality, it would be Belle blissfully singing at the beginning of Beauty and the Beast. People instrumentalize the word, creating a felt sense of verisimilitude of community. That's all, and that is not a community. The corporate world is particularly guilty of instrumentalizing the world, and they do. Community Memphis images such as come to mind, the art form of choice for modern corporations conveying generic, productive, docile people being together. So then he picks up on an article, the thesis on terrible communities, the family, the work, the school, work, prison. These are the classical faces of this contemporary form of hell. This is, again, an attack on modernity, because modernity was built on all of these institutions. They are at least interesting because they belong to a bygone depiction of community evolution and are presently merely surviving on it. There are some terrible communities. However, that fight against the existing state of things and the simultaneous, quite attractive and much better than this is I'm reading terribly because I'm in a rush because I wasted an hour plus making the video that failed, and I've still got that video in my head, so when I start going through this, the elements of that video that never got recorded get pulled in, and I have to sort of try to not have too much scrambled eggs come out of my mouth. Boy, that is a horrible metaphor. Saying all communities are terrible is harsh and disrespectful to all communities where love, support, and good work exist. Still, there is something about this premise I find freeing. Often something feels off when I find myself in a setting where a community is supposed to be. While I do find enjoyment and experience social nourishment where gathering with good people, something is missing from many gatherings, and the subtle loneliness permeates my body. And I think Kidology touches on this because she notes that, well, people are having a sense of community, and so now we have the community of people who have seen the movie Barbie. It's not a community. That's a category. And there's a world of difference between a category and a community, and it's exactly that world that the Greg Lowry character is striving for and looking for and trying to participate in.
It was very much a temporary high. It wasn't real. It was very synthetic.
Notice the language. The temporary high. It wasn't real. It was synthetic. It's exactly what the Greg Lowry character is complaining about and looking for in the church. Now, later in the movie, the Lonnie Frisbee and Connie, things aren't quite as beautiful as they appeared to be from the outside, and so he's going to leave the Calvary Chapel community, and Greg Lowry, in this touching scene, begs him, please stay. Everybody leaves in my life. And Connie sort of bends over and says, we'll always be your family, but we are leaving. And, there's a lot in that movie that's a little bit fast and loose to fit into a 2-hour Hollywood Christian feel-good movie. And as Christian movies go, it's a much better cut than most Christian movies, but it's really a very interesting movie. But Jesus Revolution movie is not as important as the Barbie movie.
Very artificial, but it is sort of the only thing that is really holding us together, which is...
it's the only thing that's really holding us together. Postmodernity has eaten away at everything.
Quite sad and harrowing to think about. This idea that we are being held together by very finite material things, by products. But aside from
that, again, that's the critique of the counterculture against the 50s.
From all of that and my general feelings about the film, one thing that really did stick out to me in quite an interesting and I would say positive way was how poetically, I think, the Barbie film represented masculinity. The film very interestingly forefronts the dilemmas of the modern man which is very interesting because, of course, there's this scene with America Ferrera who, Ben Shapiro talked about it as a very cringy thing, but I think a lot of women in that sermon, in that speech, said that's exactly the challenge of being a woman. And I think Kidology is right in that the film also had a lot of the challenge of masculinity. Various manifestations of Ken. As the counterpart to Barbie since 1961, Ken and Barbie are essentially the inverse of Adam and Eve. Ken's existence...
I think that's super interesting. They're the inverse. Ken and Barbie as Adam and Eve. Ooh, see, this is the kind of stuff I go to Kidology for. It's like, ooh, insight. Because especially when you think of, again, the Barbie movie opens with little girls smashing their doll babies. And now they're going to have Ken and Barbie. And now they're going to work out those things. They're going to work out, you go from traditional where they're preparing themselves to raise little babies. Now they're going into modernity. And maybe I'm going to have to get a cheap Ken and Barbie for props here or something. Now they're going to be Ken and Barbie, and they're going to work out what the modern babyless world looks like. And again, there's a pregnant Barbie, but that one doesn't do so well because that's not the working out of the universe of Ken and Barbie.
is contingent on Barbie, and as such, all his meaning derives directly from her. The film did a very interesting...
Now, one of the interesting themes of this video is that she notes very well that Ken is really parasitic on Barbie. Ken cannot live without Barbie, which is, of course, very Genesis-like
job of presenting Ken in this light, him gaining validation exclusively from Barbie, seeking her validation, her approval, how his day is made when Barbie just so looks at him. Her success was his success, and therefore his worth was ultimately reduced to her worth.
Right, which is which is very interesting because, again, you have to see Barbie and Ken through the eyes, imagining the worldview of a child playing with these dolls, just like you had to imagine the worldview through children playing with baby dolls. I mean, that transition is from the traditional to the modern, and it's very clear. And of course, in the mind of a little girl, she doesn't know a man. There's dad out there, of course, but she doesn't know men as maiden suitor, let's say. And so those are the things that the little girl's sort of playing out in her hands with her dolls.
The film did very well, and I think very importantly and rather uniquely did, was present Barbie as taking this dynamic for granted. Whilst she takes it for granted, she simultaneously depends on it for her validation.
And that's super interesting. And again, that's modernity. She takes it for granted, but she's still dependent on it for her validation. And so, of course, when Ken, when she sort of has a sense of Ken walking away, I want you. What is that phrase in the movie? Such a good long distance, low commitment, casual girlfriend. Because that's exactly what Ken was. Ken was the long-distance, low-commitment, casual boyfriend.
Only an exceptional person or an exceptional woman if other people look at you and tell you that, if they acknowledge and respect you as being that. You are only a prime minister or a judge or, I don't know, a model if people recognize you as such.
Okay, now that recognition is so critical, because what happens with sort of modern Barbie is in some ways a man. And she isn't a man, of course, but it's a masculine world that she is attempting to establish herself and drive herself up in the hierarchy in. It's not the feminine world, it's the masculine world. And so the dynamics of masculinity are in play. Now, I don't have... I'm kicking myself over the mistake that I made in that other video. It's like, Grim Grizz is going to make a clip out of that. I want to switch over to this Substack from Renn, which I thought was absolutely outstanding. And he has a video of it, not a video, but a recording that he put on his YouTube channel.
Newsletter number 79, The Teachings of Neo-Pagan Masculinity, originally published on August 14th, 2023. One of my big themes has been the disconnect between men turning away from traditional authorities and institutions, churches, politicians, teachers, etc., towards online men's influencers like Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, and Andrew Tate. I've spent a lot of time exploring what the...
Okay, and that's true. And I think the world of Renn. The work that he's doing is just so full of insight. I think it's, vitally important. Here we go. Windows rearranged.
Online influencers are doing and what they are saying so that we can understand them and their appeal better. And perhaps in some cases elevate our own game in response and attract more of their young male audience to the church. Today I want to continue that by looking at the vision of neo-pagan masculinity put forth in books by two men's influencers, Jack Donovan and Ryan Landry.
I'd never heard of either of these guys.
Jack Donovan and The Way of Men. The Way of Men is a short book by Jack Donovan published in 2012. It is a semi-famous book and has certainly sold a huge number of copies as it has 5,300 ratings on Amazon. only slightly fewer than Tim Keller's The Reason for God. It appears to still be moving copies. Donovan is an interesting figure, to say the least. He's gay, but rejects the label because he thinks the word has become coded to refer to a set of effeminate behaviors he rejects.
Now, it's so interesting. I didn't know this, that so many of these masculinity guys are gay. And there is something that has to do with prophilicity with that, because, of course, men are deeply attracted to the visual. And so then, if you're a gay man and you want to attract the attention of other men, you're going to use the visual signals that are going to attract the attention of gay men. And that's, of course, is going to be a little different than for heterosexual men who are not looking to attract the attention of other men in that way, but are at the same time vying with them within competitive hierarchies.
He prefers the term androphile and wrote an entire book on that subject that's since been unpublished. A significant number of online men's influencers are gay. He's also explicitly neo-pagan, worshipping Thor or some such. He was previously an ordained priest in the Church of Satan and involved with various organizations in the alt-right, though has since disavowed the movement. If anyone deserves the term pagan masculinist, it's Donovan. Interestingly, despite Donovan's bizarre personal history, The Way of Men is essentially a mainstream book. For example, he interviewed Brett McKay of The Art of Manliness when writing it, and has been featured on that site several times. Although it has some themes I reject, this book is basically safe to read. I'm sure it has been bought many times by ordinary people with no idea about Donovan's background.
One of the things I really like about Aaron Renn, he's his own man. You know, talking about this, especially some conservative evangelical communities that, you know, he's really a part of, it could have some cost, but Renn says things like he sees them. I really respect that.
Donovan's take on manhood is essentially rooted in the basic evolutionary psychology framework that's common to most online men's influencers.
And that is so key. I listened to this a couple of times already, and that's something that, you know, for Peterson, for many, for Brett Weinstein, it's all about Chris Williamson. It's all about truth is from this evolutionary story. Now, of course, you've got the question, you've got the question of morality with respect to these things, but that's sort of become that's how you can. It's sort of a little shifty way to try and derive morality from an is.
In his view, our instinctual masculinity developed in primitive times when humans faced mortal dangers. The traits men had to develop to survive in this environment are what come down to us as masculinity. The most important concept in Donovan's book is his claim that, quote, the way of men is the way of the gang, unquote. That is, the natural milieu of men is with a small group of other men, the hunting party, the war band, the street gang, a sports team, etc. Donovan writes, quote, a man is not merely a man, but a man among men, in a world of men. Being good at being a man has more to do with a man's ability to succeed with men and within groups of men than it does with a man's relationship to any woman or group of women, unquote.
Now, remember what Kidology's just said about Ken and Barbie? Now, of course, this is a gay man, and if you don't think past one generation, or you don't have the money to, you know, sort of, there's the huge ironies of our modern times. I mean, I haven't watched The Handmaid's Tale, but if there's anything resembling it, it's surrogacy, where women are just simply valued for their reproductive ability and paid for it. I mean, and that's a product not of conservative communities, that's a part of progressive communities. It's just the way that things just sort of zip around now are just astounding. So, but I love what Aaron does with this.
While recognizing that men do often form gangs, I'm not sure I buy Donovan's view of the gang as the fundamental unit of masculinity.
And in other words, the gayness isn't so if all of the and there's very much a gay vibe among the Kens in Barbie land, even though none of them are gay because, of course, at least they're little girls playing with them in the 60s and 70s. Maybe if they're playing with them to now, everybody will get the gay Ken thing. But you think of a community of gay men, well, that's a gang. There's no feminine energy that has to sort of begin to keep the gang, to break up the gang energy, let's say.
However, there are valid points here. 1. There's a communal element to masculinity. Virtually all discussion today about how to be a better man focuses on essentially individual actions. Eat better, work out, embrace the grind, impose your will on the world, get married and have kids, etc. I'm as guilty as anyone of this. But human beings are social and political animals, not lone wolves. Manhood is pursued and developed in a community of men. Iron sharpens iron.
Now this is super interesting, and he's right. He's really right.
After all. 2. Manhood is defined by a man's relationship with other men.
And this is where it's fun to take the Kidology video and this piece and put them next to each other. Because what happens at the end of the Kidology video is that all there is the individual. All there is the individual. And not so.
Scholars like anthropologist David D. Gilmore have noted that manhood is an earned status. It's not just about hitting a particular age. To be accepted as a man requires that a man perform in the activities and traits of men. There's a standard that must be met, and the people who primarily determine whether that standard is met is other men, not women. Women merely reflect what other men have already determined. As Jordan Peterson put it, quote, girls are attracted to boys who win status competitions with other boys.
Now, you can overplay that point, but the truth of that point can't be denied. And what, interestingly enough, happens in Barbie Land is that all the Kens have no hierarchies with which to compete. All there is, all there is beach. And again, now, part of the essential element about Barbie Land is, again, this is life seen through the imagination of a modern 10-year-old girl. That's what Barbie Land is. It's not, there's not a reality to it. This is life through the eyes of a child. And the movie sort of looks at that and blows it up and says, okay, there's something ridiculous about this because it's life through the eyes of a child. But there's still elements of truth in it because it's not that children don't see or know truth. It's a childhood truth where obviously there's no genitalia. You undress your Ken and they play with this in the movie. There's no genitalia on Ken. There's no genitalia on Barbie. It's at least, in the modern world where you're sort of keeping children from sexuality at a point. It's not really a sexual landscape, and appropriately so.
Unquote. In other words, Donovan's book is about the way of men, not the way of a man.
And now this is interesting because we're again back to this individualism. Oh, this was from the previous video. Where are we at here? The community offers help on the basis of local traditions and economic favors, which often differ greatly from supply and demand laws of the free market. In an old-fashioned medieval community where my neighbor was in need, I helped build his hut and guard his sheep, without expecting any payment in return. When I was in need, my neighbor returned the favor. At the same time, the local potentate might have drafted all of us villagers to construct his castle without paying us a penny. In exchange, we counted on him to defend against brigands and barbarians. Village life involved many transactions but few payments. These were some markets, of course, but their roles were limited. You could buy rare spices, cloth, and tools, hire the services of a lawyer and doctors. With less than 10% of commonly used products and services were bought in the market, most human beings were taken care of by family and community. There were also kingdoms and empires that performed important tasks, such as waging wars, building roads, constructing palaces. For these purposes, kings raised taxes and occasionally enlisted soldiers and laborers. Now, if you read The History of Debt by Graeber, you get into this question of money. And what's clear is that money is in the realm of the king, and part of what has happened subsequently is the creation of the individual. This changed dramatically over the last 2 centuries. The Industrial Revolution gave the market immense new powers, provided the state with new means of communication and transportation, and placed at the government's disposal an army of clerks, teachers, policemen, and social workers. At first, the market and the state discovered their path blocked by traditional families and communities who had a little love for outside interventions. Parents and community elders were reluctant to let the younger generation be indoctrinated by nationalist education systems, conscribed into armies, and turned into rootless urban proletariat. Over time, states and markets used their growing power to weaken the traditional bonds of family and community. The state sent its policemen to stop family vendettas and replace them with court decisions. The market sent its hawkers to wipe out long-standing local traditions and replace them with ever-changing commercial fashions. Yet this was not enough. In order to really break the power of family and community, they needed the help of a fifth column. The state and market approached people with an offer they could not refuse. Become individuals. Marry whomever you desire without permission from your parents. Take up whatever job suits you, even if community elders frown. Live wherever you wish, even if you cannot make it every week to the family dinner. You are no longer dependent on your family or your community. We, the state, the market, will take care of you instead. We will provide food, shelter, education, health, welfare, employment. We will provide pensions, insurance, and protections. This is this huge transition that happens, and now we go from little girls basically getting, working out what it means to care for a baby, to little girls working out what Ken and Barbie are and do. So the video that didn't get made, I deal a little bit with Hillary Clinton's Atlantic piece on the weaponization of loneliness. Now, I found this to be extremely ironic because I think probably 2 of the most high-status lonely marriages in America are probably the Trumps and the Clintons. I wouldn't care to be in either of those marriages. And so she writes this piece on the weaponization of loneliness, and it just comes out as a political screed. It's all Trump's fault. It's all right-wingers' fault. And what we really need is, what? More modernity? That's a big part of the loneliness to begin with. Barbie doesn't need Ken. Ken doesn't need Barbie, but there's hauntings of of memories that they once needed from each other. Now, David Brooks' piece, How America Got Mean, is much more nuanced, but in some ways equally flat-footed, because he wants to get back to institutional formation, but that institutional formation really doesn't work. I played a clip from the Tammy Peterson, Louise Perry video where Louise Perry, I gotta find it again. I'm remaking the video I lost now. So here Louise Perry is talking about her work.
15 are sometimes still at home. So they still are in their communities. They still have their parents around. But, as you said in your book, is rape a power or a sex-driven crime? Boys that are, how old are the men, I wonder, that are doing the assault?
Also young, probably. Also,
under 20?
Yes, I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but definitely skewing in that direction. It's one of the pieces of evidence, I think, for rape being motivated by power, the classic feminist line from the second wave is rape is about power, not about sex. It's not, the idea being it's not about sexual desire, it's about politics, really. I don't think that's true. There are some cases where I think that's probably true. If you look in the workplace, for instance,
that's an amazing line. Rape Rape is about politics. Really?
See junior men sexually harassing senior women. The sexual harassment always goes in one direction. So I think that in cases like that, you can see that there is clearly power at play, in that power offers opportunities for harassment. But I don't think in general that is true, or not the whole story. One of the very good pieces of evidence for that is that the age of victimization for girls mostly and women, tracks pretty much perfectly the age of peak sexual desirability, and the age of perpetration for men and boys tracks pretty much exactly the peak of sex drive. I don't think you can really explain that through the power analysis. I think you have to be thinking about this as an aggressive expression of sexual desire. And if you think in those terms, then my argument is that we need to be thinking quite differently about what the solutions are to sexual violence. Because the interventions that are generally proposed by feminists are all ideological. It's all to do with teaching boys in particular at younger and younger ages, teach them feminist politics essentially, and hope that this will prevent sexual violence.
Again, it's just, I think Grim Grizz has a clip of me hearing that for the first time, and I just couldn't. It's just the most absurd thing in the world. We're going to teach young boys feminist politics, and that'll fix it. And it's like, have you ever met a human being? Do you know what? Oh, it boggles my mind.
That Barbie doesn't need Ken to be happy or to enjoy herself. And ultimately, she doesn't need Ken to live. Now,
okay, and this is modernity. They're both individuals, and the state is there to give Barbie everything she needs. Obama had there's this famous campaign that basically the woman doesn't need a man because the woman is married to the state. The woman has a government. One of the guys in our meetup has a story about how the government giving food boxes to women destroyed Native American marriages because they didn't need men. And when it comes down to this loneliness crisis that Hillary Clinton wants to write about, well, the answer is more government and better government. It's like, no, I'm not saying better government is a bad thing, but you're using the wrong handle here.
why do I find this important and why do I find this interesting? Young modern men are lost, in my opinion, when it comes to trying to find meaning beyond modern woman, either as something to strive toward or as something to scapegoat. And this is absolutely nothing new. Young men have always depended on woman as a rite of passage into manhood and masculinity. Whether it was the young...
That's a very interesting graphic for that point.
Aristocracy traveling to the continent in order to become men, going to brothels or what have you, getting married and producing an heir. And these rites of passage are about garnering a sense of meaning and worth.
See, she's wrong, and Renn is right, because men didn't just sort of, bludgeon and take women. Men went to sea. Men went away from women. They joined the Navy before women were in the Navy. They might go to brothels, but she's just hitting all the points where men and women touch. But men were doing all sorts of things with no women around, and that's how they're establishing their hierarchy. Renn is right.
It is about understanding your masculinity, about competing with other men in pursuit of manhood. The common denominator has always been woman and their
Nope.
integral role in what it means to be and become a man. The Barbie movie shows how stereotypical Ken, played by Ryan Gosling, embodies the young modern man coming to the realization that the young modern woman he garners, and has historically always garnered, his sense of identity from, has no genuine interest in him as a necessary component to her dream life and story.
Now again, remember, Barbie Land is a fiction of a prepubescent American girl. And to understand the movie, you have to understand that is a function of Barbie Land. And so you can't sort of take it as canon. It's a fiction of a prepubescent American girl, a prepubescent American modern girl.
She is a modern woman who is finding and discovering herself in a world where feminine ideals are obsessed over, where beauty is king or queen.
Okay, why? Because of the hierarchy among women. I mean, go through the supermarket, if you still go there and if they still have magazines. You know, the supermarket aisle had women's magazines with women looking good. Women are competing against each other for men.
Where perfection and literally going to the ends of the earth in order to reverse the dreaded reality of aging are at the center of her world. In all of this and in the journey, the odyssey that Barbie is going through, Ken doesn't feature whatsoever as a central component to that. He doesn't feature in Barbie's story, similarly to how nowadays men as necessity don't readily feature as urgently or meaningfully in the lives of young women. The lives and stories of modern women, specifically younger modern women, are very different from our predecessors. And this is the first time in recorded history that something like this has happened.
I don't know that she can know that. She's probably right.
That's something as sort of revelatory insofar as the autonomy, insofar as the choices, insofar.
And again, all of this is a function of modern government and the modern nation state and money.
As the education of young women, and I mean not just a small group of women, not just aristocratic women, but all women is concerned. And that is what makes it truly revolutionary. It is as exceptional as Barbie Land. Stereotypical Ken does.
Now, of course, remember what Barbie Land is, but it's modern.
What a lot of young men have done when faced with the sudden realization that beautiful and young women aren't like the ideal sold to them by the legacies of their fathers, their grandfathers, and of course, Ken turns against that which he feels wronged by. He turns against young and beautiful modern woman. I think this realization is very difficult for a lot of men to really grasp and to understand, especially in a world which is no friend to young men. Real modern women are not a monolith. They are not conventionally beautiful. They are all manner and variety of beauty. They are all manner and variety.
They're real.
Of weight. They are ultimately brains and want to be perceived as brains before they are deemed bodies. And even when they want to be objects, when they want to be objects of desire for men, this is often done in the way of self-objectification or self-sexualization. That is not in the service of men as an end in itself, but...
No, because they were competing with other women. And even if men weren't around, they would still compete in those ways. Now Aaron there were a few interesting things in that article that I want to point out. Here is where the typical feminist objection could rise. Can't women be strong? Can't women be courageous? This seems to be something evangelicals struggle to respond to, and I believe accounts for part of why Piper defines masculinity the way he does. There are several extended biblical passages that discuss the relationship of men and women in different ways, such as by saying the husband is the head of the house and the wife is to submit. And when it comes to characteristics like courage, the pickings are much slimmer. Given the general biblicist approach of evangelicalism, if they can't proof text something from the Bible, they struggle to advocate it. And some feminist writers can simply respond with an example of gynocentric interruption like Deborah in Judges. It's a super interesting paragraph. And then he says this. Donovan has different responses to this objection because he's pagan and he's not, so he's not Christian. He doesn't deny that women can be strong, courageous, etc. Strength is a masculine virtue, not because only men are strong, though Donovan affirms that men are generally physically stronger than women, but because men and only men are judged on their strength. He writes, women can demonstrate strength, but strength is a quality that defines masculinity. Greater strength differentiates men from women. Weak men are regarded as less manly, but no one really cares or notices if a woman is physically weaker than her peers, although you will see women playing in that hierarchy, but not very much. But that's, again, partly because women are, in Barbie land, in some ways, playing with masculine hierarchies. It is similar for courage. If a man who displays courage when he should display courage earns the contempt of his fellow man. A man who displays cowardice when he should display courage earns the contempt of his fellow man. A woman who is courageous may be praised by others, but if she isn't courageous, if she runs away, she's not going to be judged as deficient in femininity. Donovan writes, both men and women can be game, but status for human females is rarely dependent on a woman's willingness to fight. Demure, polite, passive women are attractive to men and are highly well-liked by other women. It's a surprise that we don't talk more about loyalty. And again, Renn, he's so good with this stuff. Which I would have considered a preeminent virtue of primitive male gang. He does mention it. The word appears 8 times in the book, but he doesn't list it as a separate tactical virtue. I wrote about it in my newsletter 58, where loyalty is the coin of the realm. And so again, I think Kidology has it wrong that there's a lot more going on here. Now, I'm about out of time, and so I have to really jump to the end because Kidology leaves Ken and Barbie as individuals. And it's, she basically leaves in kind of a, she's trying to end in modernity. So much of the meaning crisis voices are trying to address the meaning crisis by sort of skidding back into modernity. And even when, I think Peterson sort of bridges that sometimes. Peterson can be very meta-modern, but often what I hear from him is sort of a skidding back into modernity. Same with Sam Harris and the New Atheists. They're skidding into modernity instead of when, in actuality, they're probably at the cusp of becoming much more meta-modern in this. Women won't save you.
Now, the Barbie movie did something that the manosphere has not been able to do. And that is why I think that this film...
Now, part of what she does really correctly a little early on is note that the manosphere, part of it, is still a little parasitic towards women. But if you look at someone like Donovan, who's a gay man, he's like, I don't need women at all. At least, of course, he's thinking within one generation. He's not thinking intergenerationally.
Is pro-men, and rightly so. The Barbie film doesn't tell men what they want to hear. It tells them what they need to hear. Stereotypical Ken is forced to reckon with his insecurities, with his projections, and with his lack of truly knowing who he is or wants to be. He's obliged to do this because he isn't truly fulfilled or fueled with purpose in the patriarchy. There are only so many horses that can fill the void before they are sucked into it.
That's hilarious.
That he is probably not going to find himself. He's probably not going to know who he is.
Now, again, this gets very existential, down into the secret sacred self. Ken is an individual. He must save himself. And of course, so this Ken crisis is in some ways a redux of the 1970s woman who finds, had put all her eggs in the monogamy basket and finds herself divorced without a career, without a college education. And so when her daughter grows up out of this divorce, she's going to admonish her daughter, you go out there and you get an education and you get a degree because you can't rely on a man to take care of you, because just like Greg Lowry's complaint, they'll always leave you. And so, well, if we can't trust individuals of the opposite sex to stay put, then the most godlike thing around us that we can trust is the state. And then, well, politics becomes our religion. So David Brooks, again, it's sort of this, modernist skidding to avoid the gulf, says, well, everybody sort of took this turn towards the secret sacred self. A cluster of phenomenally successful books appeared in the decade after the World War II, making the case, as Rabbi Joshua Loth Liebman wrote in Peace of Mind, 1946, "Thou shalt not be afraid of thy hidden impulses. People can trust the goodness inside," really a turn against an Augustinian worldview. This book topped the New York Times bestseller list for 58 weeks. Dr. Spock's first child-rearing manual was published the same year. That was followed by books like The Power of Positive Thinking. According to this ethos, morality is not something that we develop in communities. It's nurtured by connecting with our authentic self and finding our true inner voice. People are naturally good. Now, if you read Brooks' book, The Road to Character, he's got a whole chapter on Augustine. Brooks himself has reportedly become a Christian and is much more adopted an Augustinian worldview. And again, Augustinian anthropology. And again, Jordan Peterson, as I've said before, leverages in some ways an Augustinian anthropology that that we are not naturally, automatically, easily good. We don't need moral formation. This is what the counterculture said. We need to let people get in touch with themselves. Organization after organization got out of the moral formation business and into the self-awareness business. By the mid-1970s, for example, the Girl Scouts' founding ethos of service to others had shifted. They're no longer taking care of baby dolls. You can get, how can you get more in touch with you? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? One Girl Scout handbook asked, because that, of course, is the source of everything. And then we get down to the political. According to researcher Ryan Streeter, the director of the Domestic Policy Study at the American Enterprise Institute, lonely young people are 7 times more likely to say they are active in politics than young people who aren't lonely. People who feel disrespected, unseen, and alone, politics is a seductive form of social therapy. It offers them a comprehensive moral landscape. The line between good and evil runs down the middle, not down the middle of every human heart, but between groups. Life is a struggle between us, the forces of good, and them, the forces of evil. This Manichaean tribalism of politics appears to give people a sense of belonging. For many years, Americans seem to be awash in culture of hyper-individualism. But these days, people are quick to identify themselves with their groups. But they remain individuals in terms of how they act. Politics appears to give people a sense of righteousness. Politics also provides an easy way for a sense of purpose. Politics overwhelms everything. Political movements are fueled by resentment, by feeling that society does not respect or recognize them. So again, we're very much back into the everyone is now Ken and Barbie needing the adoration of everyone else. This leads into Freddie de Boer's piece on the anti-therapeutic, where what we all need is the adoration of everyone. It's sort of narcissism writ large. But again, for Kidology, everyone is left to themselves. And where will they go and where will they look?
In the short term, that this is something that is going to take him a very long time, if not a lifetime, as it ought to for everybody. Your identity.
Oh, okay. So here it is. Now the identity crisis is here. So
is a lifelong endeavor. It is not an aesthetic. It is not a temporary thing. It is not something that you discover at a particular age.
And so she's basically an existentialist here. And it's all up to you, and you're going to spend your whole life, again, introspecting, cultivating my identity, cultivating my prophilicity, cultivating all of this so to be seen by others. No, it's that. And you're going to be back in the loneliness crisis, or the intimacy crisis, as Mark Lefebvre likes to call it. And I think he's right with that.
It is riddled with more wobbles, with more downs than ups, with unimaginable and unpredictable changes and alterations.
And this little speech reminds me of sort of the stoic grandiosity of the new atheists, that you have to believe that you are just this short-lived animal and yada, yada, yada. And there's nobility in believing this grim fate and owning up to it and cultivating your identity. But in the end, you die alone and you will be forgotten. Well, that's good news.
It is far more difficult, far more complicated, far more grueling than the easy way out in either simping after or having control over Barbie or a model.
Why do it? Why do it? Why not? Because that's people have. Why not just live in the moment of the experience for as long as your paycheck can endure.
Woman. By the end of the film, all the Kens are acknowledged as Kens whose existence and purpose has been contingent on the Barbies and their world. Barbie Land ignored the Kens as individuals in their own right up until the final scene. And this is something which political feminism has done to men since the 1970s. Political feminism sees men as a monolith. It sees men as purely that which is everything that women have been known to and have been conditioned to fear. Men are the enemy. They are that which has to be controlled, subjugated, ignored. By the end of the film, Barbie acknowledges Ken, his feelings, and his individuality for the first time. She hears his
So Ken gets to be an individual now too.
struggles without condescension, without disdain or ridicule. She apologizes for taking him for granted, for refusing to acknowledge his humanity fully and truly. But what I found the most important and the most crucial was that Barbie does not and will not save Ken. She will not be Ken's Eve, either in saving him or being blamed for his damnation. In this, he will have to find his own way to his identity. He will have to find his own masculinity without her, without Barbie, without modern woman. And when I've said this, I have been taken out of context. It has been a bit misconstrued as me saying that men need to go their own way. No, men going their own way is completely and is all about woman. Men going their own way is the ultimate extreme example of men seeing woman as the enemy. It is the same as political feminists who are political lesbians, because ultimately their
I think she has a point.
entire existence revolves around their enemy.
It's finally parasitic.
Around that friend-enemy distinction. Women are friends, men are enemies. And in this, it's the most extreme form of an enemy. And in that, I do believe that your enemy is ultimately the essence of your entire existence and life if you are making such extreme choices based on them. If your enemy forces you, or at least you perceive your enemy as forcing you to make such an extreme decision, you really have no control or agency over yourself whatsoever.
When you wear your buttons on the outside, everybody else gets to push them.
This isn't a happy ending for the Kens, but it is an important and a very real ending for them.
It's not a joyful ending, but buck up! This is your existential duty. Bear it proudly.
Ending that the Kens and I believe young men today really, really need. There is no past to yearn for, nor is there any woman who is obliged and
So it's individualist, atheist existentialism. Again, deeply modern. And so again, we have this up. The meaning crisis is ahead of us. Post-modernity. No. Let's stick with modernity.
expected by patriarchal norms to save men from themselves and the world. I would say that young people generally lack the insights of philosophy books, the use and
Oh, now we get the sermon.
encouragement of their own cultivated critical thinking, and an education that isn't stuck in the stalemate of the industrial era and its marketable demands. Men are noticeably suffering dearly, and it is because of this that the likes of gurus, of
Don't tempt me to be a victim.
experts, of earthly gods really appeal to them and direct and guide them, often into very dark and very counterproductive places. Many young men have realized that young women are not going to save them, and so they look for other people to save them. They look for the likes of Andrew Tate to save them, or at least a while ago they would look for Jordan Peterson to save them.
Poor Jordan, so passé. Makes me think of that Ryan Shaw. Oh.
Unfortunately, although in my opinion, fortunately, you are the only one who can save yourself.
Oh! Is that good news or bad news? Maybe if you're a narcissist, you think, I'm up to the task. I'm a Christian minister. I think, no. Definition of a Christian is someone who trusts Jesus more than they trust themselves.
You are the only one who can put your life into such a position that you can garner meaning from yourself and your efforts, insofar as your efforts in creating and building relationships with other people are concerned. And in that, you are essentially the only one who can give your life meaning. And
So if you're an idiot, or if you're an addict, or if you're just lazy, sorry, too bad for you.
who can give your life and ensure that your life has meaning for the long term and not just temporarily. And that is a very difficult and very scary thing to come to terms with. It is the ultimate existentialist plight, that realization that nobody is going to save you, that there is nobody but you. As Nietzsche, the main culprit of this mess, wrote rather ambiguously, albeit rather infamously, God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives? Who will wipe this blood off us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves?
I'm not optimistic if you're your own savior and Lord. I'll say that. But I thought the video was good. I really like Kidology. I like her videos. I think Renn has a better story to tell, obviously. Well, there's the video that I grieve. But my time is done, and this at least will be out on Monday. Sorry for the video that fell stillborn. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think.